Welcome back to Dateline New Haven. I'm Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. It's probably safe to say nobody makes New Haven tick more than our guest in this segment, Gary Winfield, state senator from the 10th Senate District. That's New Haven and West Haven. He's seeking a sixth term as a state senator this year. Before that, he was first elected state rep in 2008. Yep. That was the Obama year. It was also the Gary Winfield year. Gary Winfield, welcome back to Dateline New Haven. Always an honor to have you here.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be back, too.
So why are you running for sixth term, Gary Winfield?
Listen, there's a lot of good stuff that we have been able to do in my time in the General Assembly, and there's a lot of stuff we have left to do. I focused a lot on criminal justice, as people know, and also education, and I would like to keep doing that. I have a renewed vigor for what I'm doing, and I think I'm still making progress. So I would like another term if the people deem that to be the case.
And you've talked a lot over the years. We followed your work on both those issues. One of them was you got rid of the death penalty. You really personally led that charge for many years, and you helped elect the governor who would sign it because you got it passed. It wasn't signed before. You worked on free prison phone calls, prison. They put more limits, I believe, on solitary confinement. You led the charge in the police accountability law. We'll get into that in a little while, which I think might be one of the most misunderstood and exaggerated about laws on all sides, I would argue, in Connecticut.
I think that's a correct assessment.
But Gary, you co-chair the Judiciary Committee, and let's talk about this term. Roland Lamar was in here last week. He's a state rep, and he said something was very different for you guys this time. That until this term, you always had to talk about how little money you had, and there are tough choices. There were still tough choices here, but you had a whole lot more money. It rained COVID money from Washington. What difference did that make on the ground?
It made some difference, but I'm not sure it made the difference that some people think it made, right? So some of the monies you couldn't use in ways that you might like to use them, right? You couldn't supplant in certain ways, and there were restrictions on it. So while we might have been flush with money, and I think it's a great thing, right? It allowed us to do things that we otherwise wouldn't be able to do. There was a lot of having to really think about how that money would apply. And then many people know, some of those monies were going either directly to the municipalities or passing straight through the state. So it allowed us to do more. It also made us have to think about, if you have this much money that you won't have later, what happens when that cliff comes?
You pull that rug. Here's some money, folks. Bye. We're taking it back.
Right. So it was an interesting session, because I think that when people saw numbers, they said, well, that money means what you would normally think having that money means, but it didn't in the way I think people might imagine it did.
So talk about what you did do. What were some of the biggest accomplishments that you saw from this last term that you got to take place in?
So this was a good session, just like many of the past few sessions. I'm very happy to say that. The issue that you brought up at the very beginning, solitary confinement, as the co-chair of Judiciary, was an issue that we were hoping we could make progress on. We started work on that. Well, I started work on that many years ago, but we started continuous work on that in the General Assembly about 7 years ago. And we made very little progress. And in the last iteration of the bill, we were able to begin conversations that we've been trying to begin with corrections. And that meant that this year we actually finished that off.
Did you pass any part of it?
We passed the bill.
And what passed?
So we passed a bill that limits the number of hours that you can keep a person in a cell. We created a group that has oversight in the prisons now. And
specifically about solitary confinement.
Yes, but it has oversight of what's happening. And so that's a good thing. And it's a collaborative effort on the part of the advocates and the Department of Correction, which is what, at least from my perspective, we were always trying to do. I think kind of like police accountability, people misinterpreted it as we were going in to say that we are going to come in, we're going to take over, and you have no say. That really doesn't make a lot of sense, right? I think what we really want in all of these things that we're working on is to have a sense of what's actually happening, and when something goes wrong, to be able to know what actually went wrong and deal with that issue.
And, you talked about 7 years, Gary, and I think it was at least that long you did the death penalty. It takes time to get rid of those exorbitant fees. They had an outside company charge people to make phone calls from prison that were much, much more expensive than any phone calls any of us ever make, and someone was profiting from that. You got rid of that with Josh Elliott. Right. It's collaborative. It takes a lot of years. People don't think about that when they think about legislating.
They don't think about
They
that.
think, why can't you guys just fix the problem? Or why are you talking so much? Or why, like one guy we had in there saying, I don't like these like boring meetings when you're talking on and on about stuff. Just do something.
Yeah, I think we don't all come from the same place, right? And this is a matter of lining up the votes. Look, Bill Dyson, my predecessor, was talking about prison phone calls. He used to tell a story about how children would go to the prisons, they give them a bunch of money, and they find out that the prison was a place where you could get money. He'd also tell a story about how much it costs families and the impact on families for having to make prison phone calls. So this is not something that started when we started the conversation with Josh Elliott and some of the advocates who were working with him, but this is a very long-term conversation.
I forgot that you had Bill Dyson, because Bill Dyson was also the leader on issues like the death penalty. You kind of picked up the torch and got it past the finish line.
Yeah, listen, Bill and I think many people know, had a kind of a symbiotic relationship of sorts, and we agreed on a lot of stuff. And some of my initial work was the stuff that he agreed upon that I was working on as an advocate. I became a legislator, and I wanted to finish it off. But my point was that these things take an extremely long period of time, and when you're in a place where you have Democrats and Republicans, and the Democrats come in all different flavors, it's going to take time to get people to understand your point of view and recognize you're not just trying to give things away, which we're often accused of.
Yeah, and so what else was a highlight of this term, Gary Winfield?
If I keep
it was
going,
a short session, so you couldn't do as much. You had to prioritize.
Yeah, well, some people wish we would do less even in the short session. But one of the judiciary bills that we did that I think was really important, and this kind of ties into what we are seeing now with the Randy Cox situation, was a bill with the young lady in Bridgeport who the family didn't know that something had happened to her.
They didn't notify her family that she was murdered.
They didn't notify the family, so we put forward a bill and passed the bill out of judiciary to make sure that notification happens.
And what does it say? What has to happen?
It requires that the notification be made.
To whom?
To the family, to the family members.
Immediate family?
Yeah, to the immediate family.
And in what cases? Murder? I mean, homicide? Or
yeah, in the case of a homicide, that a person who is in the immediate family be notified. And the attempt, right? You can't, if you can't get a hold of them, of course, but the attempt be made. And that brings me to the other bill that we tried to do but didn't get passed, which was the bill for effectively what they're calling the medical Miranda. So there's a call for that right now, but we actually had a bill on this during the session. It passed out of judiciary, it passed out of the Senate. Unfortunately, it didn't make it out of the House.
And what would that do? Require, if someone says they have a medical injury, to have them examined?
It would require that appropriate medical attention be given to anyone who's in police custody. And it's just like the other bill. It's a bill that you would think we wouldn't have to do. And I wish we didn't, but situations have demonstrated to us that these are real issues. Mm-hmm. And to your question earlier, I think that's part of it, right? So initially, when we bring these bills up, people are like, this is nonsense. You guys are just making this stuff up, until you see something that happens locally. People think that what happens in other places can't happen here.
And Gary Winfield, State Senator here on Dateline New Haven. One thing that strikes me is I've been seeing that different rankings of the safest states in the country. Mm-hmm. Connecticut's been ranking 4th or 5th out of 50. Mm-hmm. Boy, that is not the sense I get when I hear the discussion among you guys up in Hartford. What's the disconnect?
Well, politics. I mean,
people are scared of crime, and no one likes crime, obviously.
No one likes crime. I've been a victim of crime since I was a kid.
And
right?
you were in front of your house this session a couple months ago. You had someone shot in front of your house. Fell on your porch.
A bullet went into the house. So no one likes crime, and I am not here as a chair of judiciary, or even before that in my work, to make sure that all the criminals or people who've committed crimes are able to walk free. That is not what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to do is make sure we have a system that actually works. And I think that we have been told that the system works when it doesn't. It doesn't rehabilitate people. It doesn't prevent crime. It's the same conversation we had during the death penalty, where if you actually look at the data, the places with the death penalty actually had more of the crimes that you were trying to prevent. And I am trying to take a look at what is actually happening, despite what people might believe, and move us forward in that way. And that's a difficult place to be, because if you've always been told this thing in front of you will make you safer, and someone comes along and says that's not true, it's hard. It's difficult for you to say that person is telling you the truth, no matter what data sets they show you, no matter how much they can demonstrate.
Well,
that what
police
they're saying
accountability law, you passed that after Black Lives Matter, I guess 2 years ago, right? And the argument was that cops were not going to be aggressive, quote unquote, when they needed to be, because you no longer had them shielded, right, from civilian lawsuits if they they could be held personally liable if they break the law and like kill someone when they shouldn't have. Correct?
So that's the argument.
No, but that's what the law does. You are no longer have this automatic shield if you break the law. If you do a Derek Chauvin, you're not going to be protected.
If you do something that's malicious, wanton, and willful, yeah, absolutely. But that's not normal, right? And so when you do things of that sort, you shouldn't have a shield. Right? Like if you do something with intention.
But also before the law even took effect, people claimed that was leading to more crime because cops weren't doing their job. And it was just bizarre to me because as a reporter, I know how hard it is to ever get a cop found guilty by a jury. And we might argue that's okay, but it's not like every day, every year, you're going to see cops losing civilian lawsuits and having to pay out of their pocket. But you are going to see a lot of cases where people go to prison for crimes they didn't do.
Right, we have seen a lot of that, but let me take us back for a second because police accountability in Connecticut is not the 2020 Bill 6004. Police accountability in Connecticut, at least as I've been involved, started off doing one thing at a time, and then in 2015, after some of the things we saw with Trayvon Martin and other places, I said, look, because this hasn't happened here yet doesn't mean it's not going to happen, and elements of it have happened in Connecticut. Let's fix this system. So we did a bill in 2015. That's how you get body cameras on police. We did another bill in 2019 after the incident with the Hamden cop and the Yale cop over in the Dixwell area. And then we did I'm sorry?
And what did you get in that bill?
That was the bill that dealt with the interaction that dealt with creating the Police Accountability Task Force that was looking into the issue of those with mental health issues and police, which is where we have a lot of...
in terms of people police deal with mental health or police officers who have mental health problems?
No, well, there was another bill that dealt with police officers and mental health, but this was the interaction between police officers and civilians who have mental health issues.
We need help on that.
We also, at that time, continued to deal with the issue of the use of force and whether you should be engaging in certain ways. So what I'm trying to get at is people understand it as the 2020 bill, but it is an iterative process.
And in 2015, was that allowing body cameras or requiring body cameras?
So in 2015, I wanted to require body cameras, but the lobby against it shut it down. So what we did was we created a system where if you took the body cameras at a certain point, you would get 100% of the funding for it. And then the funding would go to 75, 50, 25, trying to incentivize it, saying, look, we all know eventually we're going to be doing body cameras. 2020
was the bill version with the accountability.
And 2020, well, there's accountability.
I mean the lawsuits, shields from lawsuits.
That was the 2020 bill, the one that people talked about as the loss of qualified immunity, that we described as governmental immunity because qualified immunity is really a federal concept.
Mm-hmm. And so that passed. Did you change it the year after?
There were we didn't change substantively the bill. There were tweaks to.
So what happened in real life? I can think of one example happened in real life. There was a cop in New Haven who was raping prostitutes in Fairhaven. He got fired because of your bill, I'm told. Mm-hmm. Connecticut Post, specifically because of that bill, barred him from being a cop anywhere else in Connecticut. Otherwise, this guy who rapes prostitutes on the job could get a job somewhere else in Connecticut. Do we know of any other real life cases that were affected by that bill?
Well, I want to clarify because I'm not sure that it was specifically because of the 2020 bill, because the 2015 bill had a provision to bar you from being a police officer if you were found guilty in certain ways too, right? So this is why I'm saying, in order to actually understand what we're doing here, you have to understand all three bills, right?
So has anything happened in the last year besides that incident that you saw?
So you had the case in West Haven that many people thought was a dead case. Suleiman, right? And if people think about it, it's the Inspector General that went back and dealt with that case, right? So that Inspector General arises out of the 2020 bill.
Oh, okay. That was created. The position was created. Right. And that was the one who found that there was a crime.
Right. So, but largely the things that people or the police seem to be suggesting to people were going to happen, that there would be all of these lawsuits and you wouldn't be able to do anything. None of that has happened.
Have there been lawsuits based on it?
Not that I know of, but certainly nothing to the rises to what was suggested.
All right, and we're talking to Gary Winfield, State Senator, seeking a 6th district, representing the 10th Senate District in New Haven and West Haven. You're also on the Education Committee, and you were in New Haven, the Board of Alders recently. Tell them about a right to read law. And that law says that we need to switch how we teach reading. New Haven's reading has really collapsed. The kids aren't learning to read. Mm-hmm. And there's this national movement away from the way we've taught reading for the last bunch of decades. We've taught something called balanced literacy that says kids learn all different ways. So have them look at pictures to guess words for some of them, sound out words, or look at a word, see what it looks like, and that the brain science has shown that almost every kid, no matter what background, race, economics, has trouble learning if you try that approach as opposed to focusing on phonics. So you've passed the law that said by next year you have to get a state-approved curriculum that's in some form of something called structured literacy that isn't just phonics based on that. Did you agree with that law?
The law that we passed? Yeah, I think you could argue this all day. This has been being argued for 40 plus years, right? And just to take a step back, about 10 or 11 years ago, I was responsible for the bill that created the K through 3 reading program in the state, which is called CK3LI. And it largely deals with the issue of reading in a way that the bill is advocating that we do. So obviously, I agree with what we're trying to do. I do think that there are many ways that you could teach a young person to read. I think the problem has been not that you do the other stuff, but that there's not enough focus on those foundational parts so that the other stuff works. Clearly, there are words that you learn because you recognize them clearly. But when you encounter a word and you have no capacity to sound out the letters and form a word, you have a problem in reading. And if we don't get reading correct by 3rd or 4th grade, you're done, right? You don't have the ability to be able to look at text, decipher the text, and learn the meaning of the text. And at 3rd or 4th grade, that's when school kicks into that part of schooling. So we want to be able to do that. I want my 2 4-year-olds can read. They can't read like I can read, but they can read, and they've been able to do that for a year or so.
But
right?
in New Haven, they're not on board. So nationally, the woman, I forget her name, who was responsible for writing the curriculum of tens of thousands of school districts based on the old way, said I was wrong. Mm-hmm. She said we got to go to this structured literacy. But New Haven's saying we're not going to do it. So what position does that put you in as the state senator when your home city is against the law you guys passed?
It's not the first time.
What's your role there?
My role is to make the public aware of the reason why I'm advocating the way that I am. Look, I represent the city of New Haven. But more than representing the city of New Haven, I represent the people of New Haven. If the children of the people of New Haven aren't getting the education they deserve, then I'm not on board with acting like, well, I represent the city, so I have nothing to say. That's the reason I showed up. I don't show up at everything, right? Because I do think the city has its own business. But when we go wrong, I think it's my responsibility to show up and say so.
And so what are you going to do at this point?
I'm going to keep being visible. I'm going to keep talking about this issue. And hopefully the fact that I am talking about it, a very visible person in the political structure of New Haven, puts a little pressure on New Haven to rethink its model. And you know, if we don't, I don't know what the step after that is, but I'm not going anywhere. And I think,
well, they have to get approval if they want an alternative.
They do.
Will it matter if the state senator's not on board with it?
I think it has impact. Absolutely.
So, okay. And then what about any other main education issues this year that you dealt with?
We didn't have a lot of huge education issues. We did have some furthering of. You may know that we've had the creation of various curriculum around African American history,
right, Puerto Rican history,
Native American history. So we're slowly building out all of those things. You know, the biggest thing that we did as it relates to young people, I think, was around mental health. Not directly.
That was the biggest thing this session, right? You're going to have a lot more school-based mental health. And that was even before the gun bill passed. That's really a mental health bill in Senate. Yeah. Tell me about that.
So there are 2 mental health bills, actually, a big one in the House and a big one in the Senate. I think in combination is looking to provide more resources for our young people. I have been very much on this issue, and if I'm being honest, I'm not sure we've done everything that we need, particularly when we're talking about urban communities, right? Because the issues that we see in the urban communities are a little bit different. The trauma is different. It's complex. It's continuous. And it's not that you have normally. It's not that you have a trauma in a space and you're not going back to that space. The trauma is in the neighborhood or the home. You know, I testified during this session on that, trying to move us more in that direction.
I feel bad for the kids growing up now. It's tough.
It is extremely
tough.
tough.
And the teachers and schools, everyone's bouncing off the walls. They need those clinics. They need the mental health help.
They do, but we also have to understand what the issues of trauma, how the issues of trauma are different. You can't treat the complex continuous trauma the same way you treat other trauma. And the legislature has taken a very long, the science, but the legislature has taken a long time to come to understand that. And so when we do things like, hey, we have some people there who will do what we normally do, we think we've solved the problem. We haven't gotten close. We don't do things that allow for those young people to access the resources, because we're giving them resources for people who have different types of trauma.
Gary Winfield, you've now been in the legislature since 2008 after being someone who would work as an activist to try to get laws passed from the outside. What have you learned that's changed your mind about the way the process works and how change gets brought about? What's something you think now that you didn't think in 2008?
What do I think now that I didn't think in 2008? I don't know if it's so much that I think differently. I act differently. And that's because I have a different type of responsibility, right? When I was on the outside, if I was a complete purist, well, I don't have responsibility for what happens. But here's the difference. As a legislator, if I go home at night and I feel good because I said what I felt like saying, or, told somebody about themselves, that might mean that people who are counting on me to make it happen don't get it to happen, right? And so that has changed. When I was on the outside, saying do whatever I wanted.
You always got along with everyone up there, Republicans, Democrats.
I get along most of the time, but if you watch me on the floor, you can tell that I'm sometimes very passionate and even angry about what's happening.
But people respect that.
Absolutely. I'm not doing it to. It's not personal. It is about the issue.
I do want to bring you to something that I'm wondering. I've been thinking about something you told me a couple of years ago. So one issue that's been frustrating, I know, for New Haven delegation is that you have a supermajority of Democrats in the legislature, but you can't move the needle on taxing the rich. So right now, you have a new study out where people who make over $1 million a year, and especially if they make a lot more than that, they pay a much smaller percentage of their income in taxes, state and federal local taxes, than someone who drives a bus or works at a school. And there's been proposals to have marginal tax raises, meaning that once you've made $1 million, you'd pay 6.5% rather 5.99 of your taxes. And you got a governor who's Democrat who won't let that budge. And I know that's frustrating for you guys, but then you told me once, I believe on this show, that you were talking to someone who was very wealthy up at the Capitol and said, you know what, I don't care what you do. I got great accountants. You can change any law you want. I know how to hide the money. I'll have it registered in some other state. You can't touch my money.
Yeah, it's a frustrating conversation.
What has that made you think about how you address the income inequality issue? Can you?
I think you can, and I think the change.
That was a great conversation.
It was a blow.
Little reality check. Here's some cold water, Senator Winfield, before you go back in the chamber.
Right. Look, I think it's not just the governor, and the governor and I disagree on this. I think that much of the stuff that he talks about in terms of the equity space, in terms of fixing the problems we've had, are going to require revenue that we don't have. And so if you're thinking about that, this is one of the ways that you get to the question of revenue. But it's also people within the party who are elected as representatives and senators, right? They have different districts. They have different political calculations. If you spoke to some of those people absent those considerations, they might even agree with me, but they can't go where I can go, or at least where I'm going to go, whether I can go there or not.
Yeah.
Right. So that is part of the reason why we can't get there. But it's also because sometimes people understand this stuff differently. So when you talk about the percentage they pay as opposed to the percentage people who make less than them pay, what we hear is about absolute numbers, right?
You get more money from me even if I'm only paying 12% in taxes, and the bus driver's paying 20 or 30. Yeah.
Well, you have more money, absolutely. So you are going to always pay more money. That's not a question. The question is, are you paying a percentage that is appropriate given your fair share?
Ned Lamont says you're punishing success if rich people have to pay what bus drivers pay in taxes.
That doesn't make sense. It just doesn't. So we should punish people who make less than. If you look at the schism that's there, right? If you pay a higher percentage, that's a punishment. So therefore, if you make less, you should pay a higher. It doesn't make sense.
And before we're going to close out in a couple minutes, I just want to remind people, a little station ID here. You're listening to WNHH-FM, New Haven's home for community radio at 103.5 FM, broadcast from New Haven, Connecticut. And that's our little FCC job there. Gary, what would you advise the Dems nationally? So statewide, you have a lot of races this year. Democrats are in a strong position. Doesn't mean you win every race, but you're in a strong position. You're not getting buffeted by the same extent that Democrats are elsewhere, where you have a record low popularity for the president. You have Republicans getting everyone talking about inflation rather than the issues you guys want to talk about, whether it's abortion or guns or income inequality. What would be your advice to the National Democratic Party?
I think my advice is the same as it's been for the last 10 years. Stop assuming that because you're right, it matters. That is not what's going to draw people to you. Look, I have to believe that there's a reason that I'm voting for you. If somebody tells me, look, the economy for you is bad and I'm going to fix it, I'm going to listen. Now, whether I vote for them is one thing, but I'm going to listen. But if you come in and you give me all the data and the statistics and you tell me why you're right, I don't know. Right?
In other words, don't tell people their financial situation is better than they think. Listen to what they have to say and talk about how you change it versus the other.
Absolutely. And also think about framing the other side the way that they frame you. Clearly, we're tax and spend, and we don't care about people's money, and we just use it.
But that's an irony in Connecticut, because right now the Republican Party is criticizing the Democrats for not using the one-time bounty of federal COVID money to completely just cut taxes. I would argue that you guys have been the Republicans. You cut taxes short term with that money instead of spending it all to help people who need it. But you also pay down pensions. We have a big pension debt that both parties contributed to for decades, unpaid obligations.
Right.
And that this will save us billions of dollars in years to come.
Absolutely.
You've maxed out the rainy day fund for emergencies. That is what Republicans used to argue to do. Now, the Republicans are saying it's a rainy day, this is a crisis, so you should be spending more of that money to temporarily cut people's gas tax or income tax or business taxes. Thoughts?
Because they have no direction. They literally at this point have to be the opposition. So if we move in a direction they would normally have moved in, they have to be the opposition. That's really what it is, which is baffling why we don't do better, right? If they're functioning like that, then the stuff they do to label us would be highly effective against them. And yet, because we are so sure we're right and people are going to know that, we don't do the work of doing that. And that is our failure as a party.
What about Joe Biden? Should he run for re-election?
I think Joe Biden is doing a pretty decent job despite the way that he's being framed. Again, Democrats allowing themselves.
A lot of people think he's doing well, still think 86 is going to be too old to be president.
Yeah, I honestly think that, and some people will disagree with me, but I think when you're in your 80s, you might want to let it go. I don't think I'm going to be doing this in my 80s, trust me. I do think that when a 50-year-old is considered young in any system, we have a problem. And I think the system of politics should operate differently than it operates. When I showed up, I was 34 years old. And, you would have thought I had
energy. You were at the gym at 6 in the morning.
I'm still at the gym at 6 in the morning.
How old are you now?
48. I'll be 49 in March.
I'm trying to sleep at 6 in the morning.
But, that's stuff that we have to figure out, how to get younger people in. What I'm doing is I'm not going to be there forever. I am making sure that there are young people to come behind to do the work that I'm doing.
And 4 years ago, we thought you were going to be on the ticket as lieutenant governor. That was a deal that was
fell apart.
This year, are you thinking of running for statewide office or any other office eventually?
There are people who constantly...
Right. When you're in politics, everyone's saying run for this, run for that.
I will say this. The way that I operate is always the same. It's been the same since I was an activist when I didn't want to do the state rep thing. If it becomes clear to me that the work that I'm being asked to do or seeking to do actually impacts and furthers the work that I'm already doing, then that's what I'm going to do. If not, I wasn't born doing this. And there are plenty of important things that you can do aside from always running for office. So I don't have a plan right now, but, those things change 5 minutes after you say them.
It's kind of hard to have a plan sometimes because the world changes so fast.
The world is changing really fast. Just think about the Supreme Court.
So any other last thoughts from Gary Winfield about what's next for Gary or re-election campaign or what's on your radar?
I'm running for re-election. If people want to contribute, hey, they can come to my website, Gary4CT. And I'm going to be out talking to people and doing the good work that we've been doing. And I just want to thank everybody who supported me and even those who haven't for allowing me to be here for all these years.
All right. Gary Winfield, thanks so much for coming on Dateline. We always love to have you, and I hope you'll come back.
Thank you. I certainly will.
All right, and thanks to Harry Drost, the best station manager in the business, who's generous with those minutes that go over the top of the hour. Good thing we're not on NPR. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free, from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass, inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.